Hello, and welcome to Snaprat Games. I'm your host, Luke Ramos, and today we're going to be going into some pre-release tactics. So with the new pre-release for Edge of Eternities coming out, I thought it would be a perfect time to release a video about some basic strategies for any pre-release that you will ever go to, some things that I have found useful going to multiple pre-releases in the past, and then of course some specific cards and tactics that are going to be especially effective with the cards that have at least been shown so far from the Edge of Eternities set. So let's get right into it. Okay, the first thing that we're going to talk about is mana curve. Mana curve is something that's very, very important in all of your decks, and it's something that you have a heightened amount of control on because of the 40 card maximum for pre-release decks. So I'm sure you've seen graphs similar to this one that's just on the screen, where you see, about similar amounts of 1 mana and 4 mana cards, but then the bulk of your deck is going to be in the 2 mana to 3 mana range. And then, of course, smaller amounts of 5s and barely any amounts of 6 up, depending on what your strategy is. So this is just a general rule for most decks, actually, because it makes your deck be able to play more things consistently. If you are locked on mana, you're usually able to get to about 3 and hopefully more, obviously, but if you at least get stuck on 3, if you have a bulk of 3 costs or 2 costs in your deck, you can actually still make game actions and possibly get value to then go into more cards or dig deeper into your deck. So as a general rule, you want to go heavily into the 2 and 3 cost cards. Those are just going to be some of the best cards in your deck. Of course, there are exceptions to this in decks where you're meant to have a lot of mana and meant to ramp early on. Putting in a few more 5 costs, a few more 6 and 7 costs is not a bad idea, just so you have a sink to put your mana into. On this next slide here, we're just going to show you what I'm talking about. So if you have the option between maybe slotting in Eldrazi Repurposer or Breaker of Creation into a deck, I would tend to go towards Eldrazi Repurposer. Again, this changes depending on what your deck is focused on, but Eldrazi Repurposer, 3 cost, much lower mana value, and also it has built-in ramp. So it has, when you cast it, you get a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi where you can sacrifice for a blank mana. And when it dies, similar, or exactly the same thing. So that has, of course, value pieces built into it. It's low cost, it's a 3/3, it's all around a pretty great card, especially for the pre-release format where you want to have a lot of creatures out, you want to have blockers, and you want them out early. So this is a perfect card for a pre-release. Breaker of Creation, if you have only Breaker of Creation as the 6+ card in your deck, sure, that's fine, I think it's good. However, if you have 5 costs or even a number of 4 costs in there, having Breaker of Creation, let alone any more 6 or 7 or 8 cost cards in your deck, is just not going to be profitable to you. And if you can maybe take out a Breaker of Creation, if it's not integral to your game plan, and slot in an Eldrazi Repurposer, that will most likely help you to make the best possible deck for the pre-release format and for your pre-release deck in general. So that's just kind of the idea of mana curve. You want to have lower mana values so you can play more of them. That way you can also leave up mana for interaction, combat tricks sometimes, certain things like that. And just generally, in the pre-release format, focusing on strength in numbers instead of strength in just a few creatures. Our next topic of conversation is card balance. So you might not immediately think of what this is, but as I mentioned earlier, the pre-release decks are 40 cards, so it's a very limited number of cards in your deck. These text on the screen shows approximately how many cards of each different type there are in certain decks. So 16 to 18 lands is basically what you want in your pre-release deck based on, of course, the general CMC of your deck. 5 to 7 non-creature spells, of course this is dependent on your strategy, and 16 to 18 creature spells, once again dependent on your strategy. So non-creature spells and creature spells can change depending on what the focus of your deck is. If you're building, for instance, a deck around prowess, you might want to actually have more non-creature spells, which then pump your creatures. However, most pre-release decks and the pre-release environment in general is similar to Standard in that it focuses heavily on creatures, having them out dealing just 20 combat damage to your opponents in order to win the game, and doing it as quickly as possible. So if you don't have blockers or don't have attackers, the non-creature spells are a lot less valuable. So that's approximately, the general idea of what you want your pre-release deck to look like. Of course, there are changes that can be made, as I mentioned. So, discounting the 16 to 18 lands, the remaining split is 6 non-creature, 17 creature. This is, of course, could change depending on what your strategy is. So, but that is a good balance to have right there. You can always pump it up to maybe 7 or 8 non-creatures. I might put in 7 or 8 non-creatures because I like playing instants and sorceries. I like having interaction, card draw, ramp pieces, things like that if you can find them. But 16 to 18 creatures, maybe even 15 if you're playing a light deck, is a good number to have. And you might be thinking, okay, yes, of course you want to have attackers and blockers, but aren't there ways where you can slot in more non-creatures? There are, but the pre-release format is such an aggressive format damage-wise because you only have 20 life, you only have so much time to work with in the clock of the actual pre-release game that you can't really be focusing on your non-creatures, your artifacts, enchantments, instants and sorceries, such like that. Battles, although I don't think anybody's playing battles. But creatures are the most heavily emphasized card type among cards in your deck. And that is just the way it kind of has to be, because even if you don't want to play like that, most of your opponents, if not all of them, are going to be running decks that are heavily creature focused, heavily combat damage focused, and therefore you need to have the creatures ready in order to prepare and go against that player. Alright, our third topic for the day is back to basics. So one thing that I had thought about, and I've thought about in the past actually a lot, is the colors of your deck. So the more colors you add into your pre-release deck, the weaker it tends to be, because you have to have a really, really strong land base, and you have such quick games and short, life totals and stuff like that, that you can't really be digging through your deck to find the right colored lands. So color is very important. I would tend to go to 2 color. That's what is a good range, but even monocolor or 3 color can work depending on what your how strong you are in those certain colors. However, there are 2 ways to kind of think about the amount of colors in your deck. So one, on the left we have devotion. So if you don't know what devotion is the number of colored mana pips in the cost of a card. So if you see Sothera the Super Void there, it has two devotion to black, which is 2 black mana pips in its card cost. Card count, on the other hand, is simply how many cards you have in the deck which are a certain color. Also, multicolored cards of different varieties are important to think about because you need both colors to play that, so therefore you will need you'll need lands that produce both types of mana. So in the past, when I've gone to pre-releases, I tend to go 3 color. I like to play Jund a lot. I think it works actually really well in a pre-release format. But I have run into things where I just don't have enough colored pips for certain spells. I just can't cast them. I sometimes don't have enough mana, of course, which is also a problem. But having not enough colored pips to cast certain spells, or just not having access to a color at all, can be game-ending for you in this pre-release format. So one thing that I thought about going into this new Edge of Eternities pre-release, and I thought I would share with all of you, is a way to kind of calculate, okay, how many lands of each color do I want to have in this deck? And so if you take your total devotion, look through every card in your deck, and you say, how many colored pips of, let's just say, blue do I have? And you calculate that, and then you also look at how many blue cards in total do I have? That's a good idea about how to make up your mana base. So maybe take an average between those 2 numbers and then calculate the amount of lands based on that. So it helps you basically look at, okay, if you have a majority of your cards are, let's say, green in this case, and you have a lot of green pips and also a lot of cards that are green, you're going to want to put in a lot more green lands. And of course it seems like common, knowledge to just do that, but I think looking at devotion also helps because it allows you to think, okay, if I draw this card, will I actually, statistically speaking, have enough green mana producing lands or artifacts or whatever in order to play this card? So that's something very important to think about. It can also be something to think about when you are cutting out cards from your deck. They are reprinting the Godless Shrine, Stomping Ground, Sacred Foundry, Breeding Pool, and Watery Grave, all those shock lands in this set. And that I think is actually really cool. I think it's going to be really good for the pre-release format. I think if you draw one of these, obviously 2 life means a lot more in Standard than it does in Commander. So that is something that you will have to take into account. But the fact that they are immediately untapped if you pay 2 life dual lands is very, very valuable in these decks. And it also allows you to slot in more cards and shift the mana value, the color mana value of your deck, because cards like these and other dual lands will be able to tap for more than just one color, and they're not you can slot them in and taking out basic lands in order to give you a little bit more versatility in your land base. So that's something I'm really happy about. Also, just look at the art. The art is amazing on these cards. It's gorgeous. Okay, now we have gotten into the last segment of the evening, or morning, or whatever time zone it is while you're listening. And that is Edge of Eternity specifics. So these are some particular cards that I think are going to be especially useful in the pre-release and might be value pieces throughout the game, or even just game enders in particular. So first on the list is Biotech Specialist. This is a red-green card for just red, one red, one green. It is a 1/3 insect scientist, and when this creature enters, create a lander token. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, this creature deals 2 damage to target opponent. So if you don't know what a lander token is an artifact token with pay 2 generic, tap, sacrifice, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. So it's effectively a colorless, one-time use rampant growth. First of all, lander tokens in general are very, very powerful in the pre-release format, at least in my opinion, because one of the things that hits the hardest in a pre-release is the fact that you maybe run out of lands. You can't guarantee to get as many lands into your hand or onto the battlefield as you might in a Commander game where you have more time, and therefore you have to work with a very low-cost CMC like I talked about earlier. However, lander tokens allow you to have ramp that goes directly onto the battlefield for only 2 mana and on a token. Therefore, it just allows you to have basically as many ramp spells in your deck as lander tokens that you can create, which is really, really good in a pre-release format, and allows you to play a higher CMC general deck. Not only that, but Biotech Specialist has the when you sacrifice an artifact, this creature deals 2 damage to target opponent. Obviously, if you've never been to a pre-release, you are going against only one player. It's a 1v1. And with sacrificing an artifact dealing 2 damage to target opponent, that will add up over time. You might not think about it right now, but with the number of lander tokens, if you have any cards that can create treasure tokens, I haven't seen any printed so far, but if you come across those, or just the lander tokens in general, that is actually a very significant way to deal a large chunk of your opponent's life total, because every 2 damage is another attack that you don't need to make, another damage spell you don't need to cast, because it's just a byproduct of enhancing your own board state, and you're slowly ticking down your opponent's life total. This is, I think, going to be a very effective card. I hope I draw it because I really want to play with this card. The next card that we have here, another one with lander token creation, is Seed Ship Impact. For 1 and a green, it is an instant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. If its mana value is 2 or less, create a lander token. So Seed Ship Impact is effectively, in the pre-release for Edge of Eternities, a destroy spell. There are so many spaceships and artifact creatures. I haven't seen any enchantment creatures, but just definitely the artifact creatures and spaceships. This is a 2 mana destruction spell to blow up one of those. And again, if it had mana value 2 or less, it comes with the added benefit of creating you a lander token. And here you can actually see exactly what it does. But again, as I said, the lander tokens are amazing as ramp. And so Seed Ship Impact is going to be, I think, a really great card to slot in if you have a high cost removal spell, but it just is not fitting in your deck, maybe put in a Siege Ship Impact, because you might not see it immediately, but with so many artifact creatures, this can just be an instant speed destroy spell. And with the added value of creating a lander token if you're destroying something that's mana value 2 or less. Alright, next is Virulent Silencer. This is 3 generic for an artifact creature robot assassin. It's a 2/3. And whenever a non-token artifact creature you control deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. As I said just recently, there are a lot of spaceships which eventually turn into artifact creatures, and just a lot of artifact creatures in general in this set. And I'm not sure if you don't know what poison does. Poison is a mechanic where you get poison counters as creatures with infect, toxic, or in this case, just this card. When they deal combat damage to you, you get poison counters. And if you reach 10 poison counters, you lose the game. And the fact that Virulent Silencer, a creature that is effectively just giving infect or giving toxic 2, I should say, to all of your non-token artifact creatures, is very powerful. I mean, obviously you might end up just killing your opponent with combat damage before you actually kill them with the poison counters, but it is still a very impactful card, effectively only needing to deal 10 damage with, if you just have 10 1/1s that are all non-token, they will kill your opponent if you can actually get through with most of them. And since it's a 3 cost, you can get it out pretty early. If they don't have a blocker, there's already going to be a clock ticking on the game, especially with some of the proliferate cards which they're printing in this set, which would, of course, proliferate the opponent's poison counters, ticking them even more to their inevitable death. Alright, our 4th card, Terra Pact Intimidator, 1 and a red for a creature Kavu Scout. It's a 2/1. When this creature enters, target opponent may have you create 2 lander tokens. If they don't, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. So, either option is an amazing option in this case, at least in the pre-release format. 2 mana for a 4/3 is really, really good value-wise, and also 2 mana for a 2/1 and 2 lander tokens, which are just ramp spells, is, I might say, even better actually. And even if you don't get that, they just put a 2 mana 4/3 onto your board, and if they don't have a creature out by turn 3, you're getting 3 for 4, which is almost a quarter of their life total. So either way, this is a win-win for you. I think this is a really cool card because it kind of makes the opponent think, and either way you're getting a value. And for only 2 mana, that's actually very impactful. Alright, maybe we've seen a trend here, a lot of green spells. Genomorph Imago, this is a Simic card for 1 green, 1 blue. It is a 1/3 insect druid with flying, and it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, target creature has base power and toughness 3/3 until end of turn. If you control 6 or more lands, that creature has base power and toughness 6/6 until end of turn. So again, lander tokens, they are ramp that you are creating, artifact ramp. The fact that you're getting out a lot of lands early on, and you're actually being able to possibly get up to 6 or 7 lands in this format, can make your 1/3 with flying into a 6/6 with flying, which will possibly kill your opponent depending on what life total they have, and flying blockers. And flying in general, even if it's 1 damage at a time, is a very powerful strategy in pre-release decks where there's not always a lot of flying. And for 2 mana, I think you're going to appreciate it even more. Alright, moving on, we have Ragost, Deft Gastronaut. This is our first legendary creature here. It is for 1 red and 1 white. It is a 2/2 legendary creature, Lobster Citizen. I think this might be the first lobster I've ever seen in Magic, correct me if I'm wrong. Artifacts you control are foods in addition to their other types, and have pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, you gain 3 life. And then he has pay 1, tap, sacrifice a food. Ragost deals 3 damage to each opponent. At the beginning of your end step, if you gain 3 life this turn, untap Ragost. So there's a lot of stuff on this card which is good for you. First of all, 2 mana 2/2. It's a bear, which is kind of funny. But it's just cheap, immediately gets out, and then makes all of your artifacts into life gain, which is actually surprisingly effective in a lot of the pre-release format. Gaining 3 life, even if you do it just once every 2 turns, is going to add up, because you're effectively just adding more and more the damage that they have to deal as the game goes on, more attackers that they have to amass, and eventually they might just not be able to get through your wall if you have enough life total and enough blockers that are good blockers. And then he gets even better. He can tap, sacrifice a food, deal 3 damage to each opponent. Obviously this is just single player, so that each opponent doesn't really matter as much, but for 1 mana and a food and tapping him, the fact that he effectively deals more damage to the opponent than he would deal just by attacking, and without even having to attack, so it's like effectively undeniable, is very, very good. And then his last ability at the beginning of each end step: if you gain life this turn, untap Ragost. So again, if you're creating a lot of foods, all your artifacts are foods, so if you have a lot of artifacts, you will have a lot of foods. And at the end, beginning of each end step, if you gain life, untap him. That's just another blocker for you. It's another way to activate his ability again, and it's each end step. So if you have foods that you can sacrifice on other people's turns, then you can do this on their turn, your turn, their turn, your turn, effectively as much as you want, at least once per turn. Okay, Astelli Reclaimer. This is a 5 mana cost card for 3 and 2 white. It is a creature, angel, warrior. Has flying. When this creature enters, return target non-creature non-land permanent card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this creature. And it has warp for 2 and a white. It is a 5/4. So, again, let's just say that you have Ragost, or you have your Biotech Specialist, or your any of those other creatures, Genomorphium Mago, Terra Pact Intimidator. If you have them and they've somehow gotten destroyed, or you've used them to block and kill something, this card can be warped out for 3 and get any of them back, because they're all very, very low cost. Not a single one of them is actually above 3 mana, so even if you warp it, it just comes out for a turn and then goes away at the end step to recast later. You're effectively getting another creature out onto the battlefield for free, alongside this card then being out for a turn. If you maybe have a way to sack it, it could be used for value, and obviously it can't block because warp will take it away at the end step, but you're able to recast it later, and bringing back maybe one of your combo pieces, or one of the most important pieces like the Biotech Specialist, to then deal a bunch of damage with lander tokens or other sacrifice outlets, could be really, really powerful with Astelli Reclaimer. And the warp versatility, I think, is really interesting. Obviously, you could just cast it for 5 and then bring a 5 cost back. So if you're running a deck with higher CMC and bigger creatures and stuff like that, it can also be very powerful that way. And that way it doesn't go away at the beginning of your end step. But I think the warp cost for just generally lower CMC decks, and that's going to be most decks in the pre-release format, is really cool. And I think it'll be actually quite powerful, even if it's just a 1-turn thing and then bring something back. Another 5 cost, so we're going into the higher mana value, Alpha Rael, Stone Chosen. This is another legendary creature. It is 3 and 2 black for a 3/3 legendary creature, Human Cleric. It has Ward, discard a card at random, that's disgusting, and it has Void. Whenever Alpha Rael attacks, if a non-land permanent left the battlefield this turn, or a spell was warped this turn, defending player loses half their life rounded up. Oh god, it's really gross. This card is, while it's obviously very expensive in the pre-release format at least, it's just so nasty in terms of what its ability can do. So, first of all, once you have it out, Ward, discard a card at random is a lot worse than Ward, discard a card, or even Ward, pay some mana, because you are taking cards out of your opponent's hand, and sometimes that could be another removal spell, or one of their most powerful creatures, or something like that. And since it's at random, they're probably not going to do it as often, simply because they don't know what they're going to be getting rid of, and it could be something that they care a lot about. Not only that, his Void ability is so powerful, just in general, but especially in this low life total format. So when he attacks, you of course have to have a permanent spell that left the battlefield this turn, or a card that was warped, like maybe, I don't know, an Astelli Reclaimer bringing something back. But what it can do is, since it's an attack trigger, they lose half their life when he attacks. So even before combat damage is dealt, if they're at their max life total, they lose 10 life, putting them down to 10, and then combat damage goes through. So this could just be game ending. If they don't have enough blockers, if they didn't expect to be losing so much life, maybe it puts them at even a lower life total. Maybe you've dealt, let's just say you've dealt 5 damage to them, they're at 15. You attack them with this, round it up so they would go down to 6, not 6. They would go down to 7. But if you attack them with this, they go down to 7, and then you have a 3/3 and 2/1s going through, then you just win the game. And that's all they can do. They can't really do anything against it. It's an attack trigger. Maybe they have some combat tricks which could keep them alive for a little bit longer, but they're most likely going to be losing that game simply because you got this creature out and attacked with it, which is very, very powerful. And there are a lot of warp costs. There are a lot of warp cards and cards that have cheap warp costs. So activating that ability is actually not going to be that hard in a game. And so I think this is a very powerful card. I hope it sees a lot of play. I think it has potential to be really, really broken in the pre-release format, and also outside of the pre-release format. I mean, this is just a good card if it halves your life total, especially before attack, because it's not like a Quiet as Spike where when it deals combat damage, then you have your life total, because that will actually lower the life total less than on attack trigger before damage is dealt. Alright, and then the last card for this evening is Pinnacle Starcage. This is actually I think the only, oh, no it's not. It's the only solely artifact card that I have shown this video. And Pinnacle Starcage, it is 1 and 2 white for an artifact. When this artifact enters, exile all artifacts and creatures with mana value 2 or less until this artifact leaves the battlefield. And then you can pay 6 and 2 white, put each card exiled with this artifact into its owner's graveyard. Then create a 2/2 colorless robot artifact creature token for each card put into a graveyard this way. Sacrifice this artifact. So, Pinnacle Starcage. This is, in this format, what I would consider just a board wipe in most cases. As I showed you earlier, your main cards in the deck are going to be 2 and 3 costs, and a lot of people play the low 2 costs, even 1 cost creatures and artifacts and stuff like that, in order to just generate the most value, play the most cards in a game, etc. But when Pinnacle Starcage enters, it's going to take all of those away, and until it leaves the battlefield, those are going to be gone. Of course, it does include your creatures, but if you put in a deck with a lot of 3 costs, then you get to keep all of your creatures that are above that, while if you're playing against, let's say, a token deck, because I know that there are a lot of those drone tokens with flying, you can just wipe all of them off of the board and then attack through with whatever your 3 cost or 4 cost creatures are, and possibly win the game depending on what their board state looks like, but definitely deal a lot of damage. Obviously, the second ability is also very, very powerful. It's a little bit less feasible in the pre-release format just because of how much mana it costs, but the fact that it's even an option is amazing, and if you can pull it off, you will surely win the game. So very, very powerful. I think it's going to be a really, really cool card actually in the format, and I think I have hope that this could just be a game-ending card because of how powerful its ability is. So we will see. Please tune in again. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Feed the algorithm or whatever you would like. And if you want to support, just currently just like and subscribe. I may be coming out with some sort of alternative method of support if you would like in the future. And of course, I will let all of my YouTube people and subscribers know of that when it happens. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a great rest of your day.